he used to sit at what is called the Presidential Land Reform Expert Advisory, which looked at all of this thing around about 2017-18. To his point about expropriation and land reform, or who benefits on that, and I want to clear those 2 points. One, I don't think that there's still a discussion formally about expropriation of any land without compensation. There is a different aspect which deal with the Expropriation Act, which is an update of what exists, but this is not a constitutional Section 25 discussion that is happening. But he is right on the fact that as South Africa, we haven't been clear on land redistribution about how do we select beneficiaries. Because remember, we have about 3 legs under land reform: land redistribution, restitution, and tenure. And on the redistribution part, it is where that panel, we came up with the recommendation of what is called the beneficiary selection and land allocation policy, which begins to illuminate then on who will benefit on that. And it states clearly that about 50% of that land that will be under land redistribution arm of the land reform amongst those 3 pillars should be women. And then it says about 30% or so should be young people, and then the rest will be distributed to other folks. But it goes deeper on the criteria as to what those people should look like, because the realization we had at that time was that land reform should be responding to about 2 problems, which is the restorative justice as well as the economic development side, particularly the land redistribution, which is not restitution that deals with people claiming where they were removed in their land and all of that. So there is a criteria to Sandler's point about how to deal with that. And it is also where, if you have heard the president saying, as a country, we've accumulated about 2.5 million hectares of land that is sitting in the state hands and not yet transferred with title deeds to Black South Africans. That criteria will apply when that land is being redistributed to them. So I wanted to give him comfort on that there is a deeper thinking about how to do that. Perhaps maybe it does need to be communicated clearly, and the fact that there's no longer much of a threat of expropriation without compensation on any land. I think every South African appreciates that strengthened property rights are key for investments, but at the same time, we do need to see better inclusion, and these policies begin to help us on that.
Wandile, why then do you think that there has been such little information given on the aspects of redistribution and also tenure? Because when it comes to restitution, we know that many of those claims are sitting under the land department, and they're waiting for, some kind of progress. There's a huge backlog there. When it comes to tenure, you have a significant number of those cases that are in the courts where there are disputes over that. So redistribution then, beyond just the state going out to not only acquire land that it believes it can use for the benefit of the state, where do then the individuals come in? Because how it has been largely positioned is that the land that is under the state's care will be largely for programs that are in line with government policy, and not necessarily that there are individuals that would be able to have some kind of claim to that land.
Look at I think people like Tembeka, for example, if Sandile and the colleagues read his work on land matters, he does go into deeper around the state capabilities that we struggled on all of those aspects, and many things related to corruption and the other stuff that many people have talked about on land reform. And he was exactly that, to say, let's have a much more clear and efficient process as to how to go about this. And because of the confusions that you are alluding to, it is also where, if you realize and you look at the land reform, land redistribution part of land reform, where you realize that the beneficiaries were always coming in as these groups. And then on land restitution, because of the capacity thing in investigating all of these claims that people are taking, it has led in part to that backlog, in addition to budgetary side. But the point I want to make it clear also is that, Cathy, there is land that now is already available. I mean, the 2.5 million hectares that I was talking about, if you look into it, let's say in an agricultural perspective on a productive capacity. Today, as a country, we plant all of our grains and oilseeds in about 4.5 million hectares. That's just to give you a sense of how big 2.5 million hectares is. But what we need to do then is to say who will benefit under redistribution on those 2.5 million hectares of land, and how do you begin to advertise that for the people, as well as the beneficiary selection criteria, which I was alluding to, which then will be applied. A proper communication and a proper streamlining of that is something that the department will have to do. And I can assure you that the current DG there is thinking around these things, and perhaps maybe in due time he will clarify and make an announcement as to how he will go about that. But I did feel that perhaps maybe I should call to assure Sandile that there is work on these things that is underway.
Wandile, let me thank you so much for your insightful contribution to the show this morning. I think, Sandile, you then are very justified in asking for us to do a little bit more deeper work than perhaps what we have on this issue, which we absolutely will. And we'll invite Sandile to be one of the people that comes back, as he also sits on that Presidential Economic Advisory Committee. Neje, you're in Bloem. Good morning, Neje.
Good morning, Cathy, and your listeners. Issue of a two-pot system, really, it is a tenable and exposes many companies, including municipalities. Additionally, when I heard that there was employers, those unable to submit employees' contribution to the pension fund administrator for many years, really, it is not good, Cathy.
Yeah, Najee, it does seem like there are quite a number of companies that have been caught unaware or just caught on the back foot when it comes to these applications for withdrawals for the two-pot system.
Benefit funds is a provision for compulsory contribution to the pension or provident fund. If so, employers has not fulfilled its duties in terms of the rules of the so the right of workers have been prejudiced. Where representation at company level, at a union level.
Okay.
Union is able to stay in contact with what is happening in the company. The trade union enables to assist their members with pension fund to make sure that their members receive their benefit statement every year.
All right.
Yeah, lastly, Cathy.
All right, Neje. Neje, I've got to go to news. Unfortunately, that's all I can take from you this morning. It's 10 o'clock.
Top stories this hour. Naledi Pandor threatens to sue Malema, and a new survey on the causes of strokes. A very good morning to you. Former International Relations Minister Naledi Pandor has threatened to take legal action against EFF leader Julius Malema if he does not publicly apologize for the comments he made about her. Malema said in an interview with our news desk on Tuesday that some ANC leaders, including Pandor, benefited from the now-defunct VBS Mutual Bank. According to Malema, Pandor got a bond from the bank, but Pandor has dismissed these allegations as unfounded.
I did not receive any bond from VBS. I'm just horrified that out of the blue, Mr. Malema chooses to make such a dishonest allegation about me. And I'm really wondering what is going on. I look forward to his apology, and obviously I'm seeking advice on this matter.
Mourners are making their way to the Albert Luthuli Convention Center in Durban for the funeral of the former cabinet minister and ANC struggle veteran Pravin Gordhan. He died in a Joburg hospital last week at the age of 75 after a battle with cancer. Gordhan will be cremated in a private ceremony later this afternoon. President Cyril Ramaphosa will deliver the eulogy at Gordhan's special official funeral, Category 2. Deputy National Police Commissioner Tebello Musikidi explains the order of today's proceedings.
The President has declared former Minister Pravin Gordhan's funeral as Category 2 funeral, which means it is the funeral that will be officiated by the President and the police. The National Commissioner with the senior leadership of the police will be leading the procession. National Commissioner will then, later on in the day, hand over the flag of the country to the state president, who will later hand it over to the family. This is in an honor and respect of the person of the caliber of Mr. Gordhan.
Meanwhile, the Public Works Deputy Minister, Cathy Mohlahlana, says Gordhan shared the vision of building a non-racial and non-sexist South Africa. He spoke to our news desk at the venue of the funeral.
Comrade Pravin come from a generation that appreciated the need to build a united, non-racial, non-sexist and prosperous South Africa. So the common vision about the South Africa we want to build, we always agreed on that vision. It was a vision of a united country, non-sexist, democratic, where all people have a possibility and a potential to prosper.
Economists widely expect the Reserve Bank to cut interest rates in its announcement today following the meeting of its Monetary Policy Committee. They say the cut is likely following the U.S. Federal Reserve's decision to cut its lending rate. The U.S. reduced the target for its key lending rate by 0.5 percentage points to the range of 4.75 and 5%. Economist Bonke Dumisa explains the Reserve Bank's likely cut.
After listening to the announcement by the United States, they cut their repo rate by 50 basis points, and South Africa always takes their cue from the U.S. So as it is now, I am saying it is highly likely that the South African Reserve Bank will cut the repo rate by 50 basis points as well. However, let us not push the hopes of people in case they are conservative and they cut it by only 25 basis points.
And the new research has shown that air pollution, high temperatures, obesity and high blood pressure are driving strokes, which are one of the world's biggest killers. The latest figures estimate that there are more than 7 million deaths from stroke annually. Many more people are left with life-changing disabilities. The BBC's Dominic Hughes has more.
A new study in the journal The Lancet Neurology suggests that between 1991 and 2021, the annual number of people experiencing a stroke rose by 70% and the number who died by 44%. Some of this is down to more people living longer, but researchers also point to a mix of health conditions, some linked to lifestyle and environmental factors, including increased air pollution and high temperatures. The report's authors also say there is some hope the burden of stroke can be reduced in the years to come, as so many of the risk factors are modifiable, either through our own behaviour or global action on improving the environment.
The top story at 10 o'clock, former International Relations Minister Naledi Pandor has threatened to take legal action against the EFF leader Julius Malema if he does not publicly apologise for the comments he made about her. For SAFM News, Kemudupi Makhalemele.
SAFM 104 to 107 nationwide.
Weeknights on S3 are anything but ordinary. BBC Primetime brings you the best of British television from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. You love drama? Then step into the world of Luther as he cracks down on criminals terrorizing the streets of London Monday to Wednesdays at 9 p.m. Top Gear will have you falling in love and rolling in laughter as Jeremy Clarkson and his team take you on an automotive journey like no other, Monday to Wednesdays at 10 p.m. Channel your best entertainment with BBC Primetime, only on S3. Open up. S3.
Banyana Ba Style believe the only way to maintain their lifestyle in the summit is to grab an important win. However, JBW ladies have calculated the power of 3 vital points and refuse to settle for less. This is the Hollywood Man Super League. Catch Mzansi Queens of the beautiful game. Mamelodi Sundowns Ladies FC versus JBW Ladies FC on Saturday 21 September at 11 a.m. Live on SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4. Also available at your fingertips on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Brought to you by SABC Sport. For the love of the game.
How can we make healthcare work for everyone? Join the discussion at the 2024 GEM Symposium on the 26th and 27th of September 2024 under the theme Innovate, Integrate, Accelerate, a Universal Health Coverage Commitment. This event will bring together experts to shape the future of healthcare and tackle critical challenges such as healthcare access and prevention. Be part of this important dialogue. Visit www.gems.gov.za to register and for more details.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
8 after 10 o'clock, welcome to the second hour of the show. I'm Cathy Mohlahlana. If you've just tuned in, a pleasure to have you with us on the show. Coming up on the show this hour, we are going to be focusing on Municipal Watch, and today we're unpacking the role of public-private partnerships at municipal level. Often when you talk public-private partnerships, of course, there are people that naturally get anxious because they think, okay, services provided for public good, the minute you bring in private players, that could mean maybe privatization, that could mean an increase in the cost of some of these services. And what does that do then for the developmental agenda in particular of the country? But of course, there are examples where it has worked, and what must be done in a case where we have, failing infrastructure and a lack of administrative capability to actually deliver on what is required. All of those are acknowledgements that have been made, right? That there are serious gaps in as far as skills are concerned. How do we bridge those gaps? Cathy Mohlahlana will be joining us for that conversation this hour. And I'd also, of course, love to hear from you. What have you seen in your community when it comes to some of these public-private partnerships, and has it worked? Has it worked? Well, before we get into it, some of your WhatsApp voice notes from the open line, a number of you responding to Incognito. He says, stop bringing your personal problems on air. They're none of our business. We are here to solve societal issues. This is what some of you had to say.
Good morning, Cathy. Cathy, I'm fine. Peteni from Northwest, Loudronstad. Please, Cathy, let that guy stop talking about Good Samaritan. But to all these people who assist, who've got the heart to assist, to hear from the people, doesn't do nothing to them, to him. So the best thing to do is just leave the Good Samaritans of God.
Good morning, Cathy. You know, the spirit of Ubuntu. We are black people. We have been brought up to care for one another. The latter speaker who's busy here, not wanting to hear what other people are suffering with, not wanting to chip in and help. We know, man, it's tough times. Things are not going well for a lot of people. So if he has got a problem with that, let him go and turn to Radio Sonal Grens or something.
Good morning, Cathy. You're speaking to Manzini from Cape Town, Guguletu. Would one say gating is working, or is gating seen more on media or on social media? That's my question of the day. Thank you.
Good morning, Sis Cathy, and all the Radio SA FM listeners. Sis Cathy, may the soul of the respected Minister of Private Gordon's caliber rest in eternal peace. We will always remember his best. We know his best. We don't have to be told about his best. We know of his best. I'm Tinjiwela Base from Velco.
Good morning, Sis Cathy and the listeners of SAFM. Sis Cathy, the food is going down, the petrol is going down, but why ESCOM increase electricity? No. Tshwantse ba tsemo radio ne ba re tlhalosa jo rona why bona ba increase electricity ngola dilo tse dingwe di theoa. Doni Machaba from Motloka Mokomeni. Thanks, Sis Cathy.
Good morning, Cathy. Panyaza Lusufi, acting as if he's surprised that projects are taking so long to complete, taking more than 10 years to complete. Well, obviously, he's part of the problem. He's in charge of Gauteng province. And obviously, he wants these projects to take very long to complete so that they can keep re-awarding these tenders to themselves. So the only people Panyaza Lusufi will keep fooling are his ANC voters. Thanks, Lionel Woodbank.
Hashtag SAFM Talking Point.
Okay, you're listening to The Talking Point. Of course, it is Municipal Watch. And this morning, we're looking at public-private partnerships at a municipal level. Cathy Mohlahlana is the Chief Group Advisor in DSO Consulting, also an expert in local governance revenue matters. Mohlahlana, good morning to you. Thank you for your time this morning. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, good morning, Cathy, and good morning to the listeners.
As our resident expert on municipalities, today we are going to be focusing on public-private partnerships at a municipal level. Firstly, do you find that the nature and form that these relationships take is different to what we see on a national level? Let's say, for example, last year, we had that backlog at the country sports. Before you know it, there's a committee that we're told has been put together that includes the private sector that is working to unlock some of the challenges. So that's a recent example of a public-private partnership that I can point to at a national level that seems to have worked because we don't necessarily have those blockages at the ports anymore. They seem to be continuing their work. Of course, it's all not, I don't want to say it's not transparent, but we don't get to see fully what is going on behind the scenes. The level of transparency around those partnerships is perhaps not what it would be if this was a process that was being solely undertaken by a government department. So do they take on the same form?
I think in terms of public private partnerships, we must view them firstly as something that, or at least an instrument that is available for government to be able to tap into the private sector, whether it's finance, whether it's skills, whether it's design capabilities, and so on and so forth. So the question in terms of the comparison between the national or provincial as well as municipalities is a fair one, because municipalities sit on the other side with infrastructure that must benefit many more people. And of course, we're not saying that the ports don't benefit the country as a whole, but if you assess the fact that there's water resources, there's electricity, there are roads, and all the different services or economic infrastructure as well as social infrastructure that is there at local government, it definitely requires that there be more involvement. We don't see a lot of involvement, or at least a lot of public-private partnership projects being undertaken at local government. I think that's perhaps the answer. We're seeing a lot happening at national and we are not seeing it extending to the infrastructure that is widely available, save for the Gautrain, for instance, that has been put in place, save for the hospitals or the health side that we can delve into to indicate how they've used PPPs to unlock the health care provision and specialist health care provision in some cases, such as renal and facilities and other facilities. So the issue here is that we believe that triple Ps or PPPs should be widely used at a municipal level, because it can unlock so much from an infrastructure point of view, in as much as it's being used at a national level. But there are more use cases at a local government to drive the usage of triple Ps and to gain the skills that are required and the financing. And of course, the risk is the other aspect which can be transferred from government into the private sector.
Melanie, there are people who disagree with that view, that in fact we shouldn't have more public-private partnerships, we should have less. Because all that does is that it creates a reliance of the state on the private sector. And ultimately, when these private players come in, all they're doing is creating a pipeline for how these services that are primarily supposed to be fully administered by the state, then end up being outsourced to the private sector. And while it might be in a crisis situation, not necessarily a bad thing. So if you're sitting without water and you know that if there's some kind of agreement struck between a municipality and a private partner that could get you water tomorrow, you're not necessarily going to be opposed to it. But the long-term effect of that, of course, might have very different outcomes, including for you as a citizen.
Cathy, perhaps we should unpack what a triple P or PPP is, because I think some of the arguments that are being advanced may indicate that there is not an in-depth understanding of what a triple P or PPP is supposed to achieve. So firstly, a PPP is a contract between the public sector, which is government, as well as a private institution. So firstly, I think the word contract is a crucial one, because it does not amount to just an outsource or privatization for that matter, but it's the ability or capability that is sourced by the public sector from a private entity to be able to deliver the services that the public sector is supposed to deliver. Now, what are the cases that would necessitate that there be such a partnership? One, shortage of financial resources, deficiency of skills, risk associated with the particular project, and the aspect around galvanizing the usage as well as the management of that particular facility. So those are the key four things that we can put forward as a way of invoking a triple P. Now, it's of course, there's a time period to a triple P. It may be a 15-year concession, it may be a 20-year concession, or it may even be a 30-year concession with regards to how those facilities and the contracts and the financing structure has been put in place. Now, the other aspect of it is that whilst the facility will be operated between government as well as the private sector will be responsible for resourcing it and employing people who are going to render those services. Now, when the concession ends, there is a transfer clause which says that facility is now being transferred to the public sector, be it health, be it Department of Transport, be it water and sanitation, and all of the different departments that may have participated in such. So there is a transfer clause. But the idea is that get the facility to be running, finance it, build it, make it a state-of-the-art facility that also employs the very same nurses or the very same doctors or the very same public officials who at the end of that concession will still be part and parcel of government. But you have unlocked a critical area of infrastructure which would not have finance within the fiscus, because the other option is that government must finance within the fiscus, and if there are shortages, it means they have to keep on budgeting and delaying the provision of such services.
I want us to get into some of the practical examples that we can look at where these triple Ps, as you describe it, have taken place, also so that we make it practical for myself and everybody else that's listening to this conversation?
So let me start by saying there are different formations, or at least archetypes of triple Ps. There is one where you design, finance, build, operate, and then transfer. Okay, so that is the first option. So it means that the responsibility has now been conceded to the private party to carry out all of the designs, the financing, construct. So it's a turnkey project, if you put it in the current terminology of how projects are being rolled out within government. But this is financed solely from the private sector. It's an off-balance sheet financing equivalent to a project financing way of financing infrastructure. So it does not add the burden on the government side to be able to go and borrow money. They may, of course, pay a unitary fee, which is just a once-off fee or an annual fee or whatever the periods that are required where they are paying towards the operations of all of that. Then there's designing, financing, and operating. You design, you can build, operate, and then transfer, and so on. So those are some of the different examples. So when I explain, for instance, in terms of roads, you'll find that the N4 toll concession is one such that Sanral undertook not so long ago. The private party designed, they financed it, built it, they operate it, and after a period of time, which is about 30 years, they will then be transferring it. Now, you can, as government, also opt to refinance because perhaps, the collection of revenue from that infrastructure does not equal to the amount that can settle whatever the debt is that was incurred by the private party. Then they can extend it. But government at this during that concession are also earning money. And it's money that they would not be able to earn if they had not if they had not participated in such a particular scheme. So they cover roads, the N4, the N3, the various corridors that must be unlocked, and that is economic infrastructure. So if you view it in that way, the economic infrastructure is very important for the movement of goods, movement of people, to access the ports, to access the various areas where goods can be moved easily. Then there's also on the health side, which is more looking at the health facilities, and this we can count as your social facilities where you sort out the health and dialysis facility. There's the big one, which is the King Albert Luthuli, Chief Albert Luthuli Hospital, which is one of the heralded state-of-the-art hospitals. It can also permeate into tourism, where SANParks has also invoked triple Ps to build specific concessions of lodges and all of that. And what happens is that they increase their revenue base, and they don't have to get involved in the operations of such. So there are merits, of course, but each one of these PPPs must be designed in such a way that it must have a benefit, a public benefit. And that is the underlying factor, public benefit without necessarily the risk. There are many projects that are standing still today where government wanted to undertake those projects and finance them, and unfortunately they've become a standstill projects, or they are incomplete and therefore are not able to bring the benefit which was required, whether it was services to the population, or it was revenue into the fiscus, or to reduce the risk, and so on and so forth. So triple Ps is just but another way of augmenting what government is already doing from the fiscus. However, the guidelines are there that define how this process must be managed so that it does not just become a free-for-all type situation, or a way of privatizing public amenities and public services, and taking away from government in that way. So I think those are the controls and what we can at least talk about in terms of how can we design a triple P framework that would enable public benefit to the citizens, whether it's financial, whether it's social, and all of that, such that, at the time that, the private sector obviously wants to make a return. they should be able to make that return that they would like to make and can walk away and perhaps identify other projects that they can put forward or begin so that, there can be services across the country. We have a growing population. In South Africa, we have influx of external people coming into the country. So there are pressures that are starting to cause cracks in the various public service amenities that the country is able to finance or able to afford or even able to plan for.
I want to use the example of the Gautrain that you touched on earlier, because of course this was a really critical infrastructure, and it's been mentioned quite a number of times just how much improving public transport will make a significant difference in the lives of South Africans. At a local level, we have seen the intervention of your rapid bus transport systems. Some of them work well, some of them not really. But there does seem to be a challenge whenever infrastructure overlaps across municipalities. So you have a Gautrain that goes through 3 different metros in this country. And maybe unpack that particular model.
So the Mbombela concession is quite an interesting one with regards to the fact that it initially is a 20-year concession, started out in 2006. And as you can see, the movement of people in a rapid manner, in a timeous manner, would have been undertaken by the likes of PRASA to move people between different, whether it's suburbs or townships, whichever way you would like to call it. You would have seen people moving from the outskirts into the city center, but you did not have a public transport that would be able to move people within the cities in a rapid manner, except for using buses, except for using taxis, except for using private taxis and so on. So the Mbombela concession was an important one because it was linking 4 key nodes. It's linking the Johannesburg, it's linking the city of Tshwane, it's touching on the Ekurhuleni because of the airport. So really that triangle, if you may put it in that way, enabled the movement of people where they would rely on public transport and move between the cities. And that was an integration of the cities. If they talk about the Gauteng cities region, and it's meant to make sure that the gaps in between are closed. So PRASA would service a particular need. The taxis obviously still service a particular need. So the way that they had designed it, it's...
Mielane, I'm going to pause you there before you get into the rest of that detail. We're going to continue this conversation looking at then these public-private partnerships. Where do you think there are opportunities for these partnerships to be fostered at a local level? I'd love to also hear your contributions on that. We'll continue the conversation with Mielane shortly. It's 10:30, time for your latest news headlines.
Thanks, Cathy. And with the news headlines, good morning. The body of the former Cabinet Minister Pravin Gordhan has arrived at the Albert Luthuli Convention Centre in Durban ahead of the special official funeral Category 2 with police ceremonial elements. Former International Relations Minister Naledi Pandor has threatened to take legal action against EFF leader Julius Malema if he does not publicly apologize for the comments he made about her. And the U.S. brand Tupperware has filed for bankruptcy as it struggles to survive in the face of sliding sales. And those are your headlines. A full news update at 11.
Taking a look at your markets this morning, the rand currently trading at 17 rand 45 to the dollar, 23 rand 13 to the pound, and 19 rand 46 to the euro. Markets in Asia ended today's trading session on a positive note. The JSE has extended gains in mid-morning trade. Markets in Europe are higher this hour. Gold is trading at $2,582. Platinum $988 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil is at $74.48 a barrel.
When self-made billionaire Wilton Knight rescues police detective Lieutenant Michael Long after a near-fatal shot to the face, he gives him a new identity and a new name, Michael Knight. Paired with the unique Knight Industries 2000 aka kit, they are brought in during situations where direct action might provide the only feasible solution. Kusazo Shuba and Michael Knight and Kit are ready to rise to the occasion. Channel your best retro with Knight Rider, weekdays at 12 p.m. only on S3. Open up. The world's best football league makes its return to S3. Will Arsenal finally win their first title since 2004? Or will Man City continue their dominance of the league and win their 7th title under Pep Guardiola? Will the Dutchmen in Erik ten Hag and Arne Slot have something to say as Man United and Liverpool step in to contest for the title? But it's not only about winning the title. For some of the 20 teams, it's a chance to improve on their performances from last season. While for others, it's the battle to avoid relegation and stay in the top flight. Every team has a point to prove. This is not just football. This is a masterpiece being played out every weekend. Channel your best sport with the English Premier League. Saturdays at 3 p.m. on S3. Open up. This September, S3 brings you thought-provoking nature dockies that will change the way in which you view the world. Temperature Rising tells the story of 3 activists as they grapple with what thinking globally and acting locally means as they fight the barriers to climate action. Airs Sunday the 8th of September. Channel your inner activist with our selection of premium dockies Sundays at 5 p.m. only on S3. Open up.
Grass will suffer when Golden Lions collide with Natal Sharks. They both target the gold medal. Gauteng tackles KZN. This is the Currie Cup final. Catch the incredible battle of Mzansi's great rugby teams, Golden Lions versus Natal Sharks. The Saturday 21 September at 3:30 p.m. live on SABC2. Also available on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Proudly brought to you by SABC Sport. For the love of the game.
Healthcare is everyone's business. Join the conversation at the 2024 GEMS Symposium on the 26th and 27th September 2024, where experts, policymakers and innovators will gather to discuss the future of healthcare. With the theme, Innovate, Integrate, Accelerate, a universal health coverage commitment, this symposium will dive into key issues such as healthcare access, disease prevention and health promotion. Visit www.gems.gov.za to register and for more information. Don't miss the chance to be part of this important dialogue.
Municipal Watch, bringing your local issues on the national agenda. SAFM, leading the conversations that move us.
We continue the conversation on the talking point. We're focusing on public-private partnerships at a municipal level. Cathy Mohlahlana, Chief Group Advisor at Ndiso Consulting Group, is our guest this morning. He, of course, is also a local government and governance expert. So we've been unpacking then some of these models, and it's also quite insightful, right, to hear the various options that are available, at least what we have seen nationally, and how this could potentially then trickle down to local government. But Mohlahlana, you are still unpacking that the PPP of the Gautrain, and again, this being a project that touched through 3 different metros, and what it was really that made it work.
So let's the structure of it. Firstly, it's initiated by the Gauteng Province Department of Transport and as it's aptly called, it's a rapid rail link that must link various cities all the way to the airport, which I think it's a unique one, because building on what the airport does, is touching another sphere of transport. Of course, it touches where the buses would stop at Park Station. It touches where in the city of Tshwane, also where the bus area. So there was interconnectivity. Of course, we want to look at how widespread the facility or the amenity is going to be. If it's focused on just the key nodes and it's not spreading out into the various smaller suburbs and so on, that there's a limitation. So number one, it's a 31 billion. It was a 31 billion rands project which was supposed to be running for over 20 years. What we see of it is that the makeup of it is it's a design, it's a finance, build, operate, and then transfer. However, the unique thing about the Gautrain is the fact that 87% of the funding is put forward by government, which is something that you want less government involvement. The reason why government would go into a triple P, for instance, is that they want to minimize the involvement from a funding point of view, from a financing point of view, from a risk point of view. And then the second issue is that coupled with that 87% provision of funding, only 2% is equity. In other words, whoever the partner is that is coming through is only providing 2% of the equity into the project. And lastly, then the rest of it then would be 11%, which is debt. So you want to at least look at how government can leverage the private sector. So this is government obviously carrying out the projects with them on their own, largely, and employing an operator and a designer who is going to design, build, and then operate. But the risk still lies mainly with government in this case, where they've had to, not so long, about 2 or 3 years ago, they've had to pay in quite a significant amount of money to keep the concession running. And of course, the other side is that, you have to collect their user charges, and there's a unitary payment or patronage guarantee, which they've had to put forward. So that is where the equation of risk is not well balanced, or should have been improved at this stage. And there's also perhaps an opportunity now to look at how, when they refinance it, how do they then become less of a player or less of a financier, being government, that is, so that they can free that funding to go into other projects which are equally deserving, or to expand the network of what Gautrain links. And we'll contrast that, and we can contrast it with the Inkosi Albert Luthuli Hospital so that you can see the differences.
But please go ahead.
So on the Inkosi Albert Luthuli Hospital, it's exactly the same format. It's a design, finance, build, operate, and transfer. It was started obviously in 2001 with a 15-year concession term. On this one, it's 70% debt. So they've had to source debt, obviously, from the private sector. Whoever the partner is had to put 20% equity. So contrast 20% versus 2% equity. And then government's contribution with regards to the entire project was only 10%. So you can see the equation is obviously different. But of course, the payment that comes from government is what they call a unitary payment, where government has to pay in to support the operations, to support whatever expenses that would come about there, because this is an academic hospital. It's for public good. It's for training doctors. It's for so it's for specialists. So it's to actually keep the skills and retain them within the private sector, and invite skills that are in the private sector to also be part and parcel of this particular facility. So you can see how the social facility in this case, government managed to play a lesser role from a funding point of view, and instead choosing debt, but the unitary payment obviously covers the shortfalls that would result in patients going to the hospital not being able to pay the private sector rates, but paying the the public sector type of rates within there. So those are the differences in terms of a good PPP, where government, you want less government, and you want to transfer the risk within the contract that you enter into between the public sector as well as the private sector, such that, everything else that happens, the benefit still accrues to the public sector. And then the transfer, when it's supposed to happen, you already have geared, skills, you've trained people, and you have people who can essentially carry on with the running of that particular institutions, because the transfer clauses necessitates that the employees are not necessarily for the private sector, but will remain as the public sector employees to take the services forward.
I guess on the balancing act that you speak about, Mohlahlana, it's also about understanding that government is operating within a framework of limited resources. And unfortunately, this is something that we're seeing more and more of at a local government level.
Yes.
Municipalities are simply not collecting the revenue that they need in order to actually be building and maintaining their infrastructure. Some municipalities are facing fiscal issues by design of the system, not only because there is corruption and malfeasance, and that exacerbates the problem, but even if those problems didn't exist, you do have municipalities that would be struggling just to pay their bills because of equitable share and everything else that sort of goes into the legislative framework of municipalities. So how then do you see the opportunity for local government when it comes to these sorts of partnerships?
And I think that is for us the encouragement that we are putting forward for municipalities to source financing from private sector and also source the skills. Municipalities, by their own design, are supposed to be collecting revenues. And we talk about it often that a municipality is a business within the public sector. So they rely on people paying user charges and people paying on time, paying in full, and not breaching the services or stealing the services that are supposed to be paid for. So that design in many of the municipalities where there is no industry or there is no strong economic base, it is not possible. So this is where you find your water infrastructure, your which is lying dormant, or they are not able to afford chemicals, they are not even afford the maintenance, and this is where a key partnership can take place with the private sector across the country, if you take into account the 257 municipalities, and you can include the districts in a way within that figure. So those partnerships should be looking at that critical infrastructure. DTIC, for instance, has a grant that looks at critical infrastructure provision, which can become a seed capital to start to put into those PPPs, to kick them off so that they can be designs and they can be planning for expansion and growth and so on. So it is an opportunity that we see, and it's becoming a must that municipalities should be in a way of growing their own infrastructure and increasing both economic and social infrastructure, should be looking at partnerships. The likes of this is Mbombela has done a concession on the water side. The water concession company runs, the provision of water. It may be to some parts of Mbombela, but however, it's to the critical parts where water is, they have clean water, they are able to pipe the water to the households, and there's then collection of the payments, which goes back into funding and making the concession sustainable. And it has made public service of water provision easier and simpler for municipalities. We also see in our operations from NDISO consulting point of view, where we now are having to resuscitate wastewater treatment plants, where we have to come up with operations and maintenance because there simply are no skills on the ground to be able to run those treatment plants. And this is a case in point where partnerships can take place, and not only just to run or operate the facilities, but to also keep them growing or build them and expand them for future growth. So I think from a municipal point of view, PPPs are supposed to be the silver bullet, if I may put it in that way, to expand the services, to take pressure away from the fiscus, to deal with anomalies where there is no economic base and payments, and still deliver a quality service so that service delivery does not become an issue.
Is this the case because local government is failing? So if treatment works were being maintained, were being serviced the way that they needed to, we would not be having this conversation, would we?
Obviously, we would not be having this conversation. So I think even the idea that services that are supposed to be provided by government are being privatized. So who then must provide those services if government has shortfalls, has challenges, has difficulties to bring those services forward? The option then is that let's look at who else has the skills to be able to support government, because the provision of those services are still provided at the behest of government. So if there were no problems such as that, I don't think we would be talking about off-balance sheet financing of public infrastructure. We would not be talking about project finance. We would not be talking of triple Ps. We would be in a sphere where the fiscus would be adequate to fund everything and anything that is required for public good. So the issue there is that there is definitely, it's not a bottomless pit. There is finite collections that are taking place that can only be able to cover certain services that government can provide.
But Melanie, is this not, number one, giving government a way out in terms of its own mandate and responsibilities? Number two, even when it comes to these public-private partnerships, there are always issues when it comes to the individuals that are lined up for some of these deals, that often, yes, it may, off the face of it, look like it's a competitive process, but actually it's not, because the different players behind the scenes have already been identified. Amongst those who know, there's already an idea that, okay, when we send out a particular request that looks for 1, 2, 3, 4, there are people who have already been prepared. They've already started working on their paperwork. So when Cathy and Mohlahlana show up with their proposals, all they're doing is wasting their time, because it's already been decided that Zelma is actually the one that's going to get into this partnership. And again, that's where it becomes problematic, because the landscape for it, the ecosystem within which all of this takes place, is not an open and transparent one. Yes, they could well be the tick box exercise of making it look like it is, but it is not.
So there's currently a revision of the Triple P framework and regulations that is currently taking place. My own, or at least our views, from Endiso Consulting point of view, is that let's look at how the transversal tenders are being concluded by National Treasury, and create a panel of possible partners that can work with government in the provision of various infrastructure. So in this case, we believe that it's one opportunity which can be opened up to so many of the players that are there. We must also understand that it's not everyone who can finance a 31 billion rands facility. So you would have to be of a particular caliber. So we would advocate that let the process be run beforehand without even knowing which public amenity or infrastructure is going to be financed, because there is multiple government projects that should be prepared, packaged and sent out to the private sector. So go out and fetch 30 different players, of which once they are sitting within a transversal tender or a panel, there can then be allocations where each one of the players within there can competitively, or at least transparently, be able to participate in financing the infrastructure. Of course, the issue of transparency is one that, with this particular process, would be managed even better, because you are sitting within a panel. If those projects are allocated to only one party, it means there's a risk that they may not be able to complete each one of the projects, because these are multi-billion rand projects that must be put into the market or completed. So in that way, you want to create at least an egalitarian type, transparent, system that allows whoever sits in that particular panel, whether it's a 5-year panel or however many years that they would be part of that panel, but you go through the transparent way of onboarding partners that government can then work with in the various sectors, obviously, that each one would be representing.
We're going to take a quick break. I'm back with some of the contributions from our listeners too.
Ask me how I know that 50% of car claims are pre-approved instantly. That's because I was one of them.
Yeah, they got my car back on the road with the first repair.
I submitted my claim on the ANG app. I didn't even have to call.
Auto in General is proud to be recognised as South Africa's best car insurer by Forbes and The Star for short-term insurance. Isn't it time you switch to award-winning cover? Visit autogen.co.za. Auto in General, never not there. ANG is a licensed non-life insurer and FSP. T's and C's online.
Spurs set their sights on 3 points and trust their strategy to contain their visitors.
And there's the flick, and there's the goal. Pedro Porro.
While the Bees have a huge responsibility to illustrate that if they play impressive football for the entire duration, they will march out of the pitch a happy outfit.
Narrow angle, hits the post, back to Mbeumo, 1-0.
This is the Premier League. Catch the thrilling contest between Tottenham Hotspur FC and Brentford FC on Saturday 21 September at 3:30 p.m. live on SABC3. Also available at your fingertips on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Proudly brought to you by SABC Sport. For the love of the game.
Municipal Watch, bringing your local issues on the national agenda. SAFM, leading the conversations that move us.
All right, we continue our conversation on Municipal Watch, public-private partnerships. I'm taking your contributions to this conversation. 086 000 2032. Are there low-hanging fruit at local government where you think these partnerships could be crucial in helping improve services? Your WhatsApp voice notes on 0614 104 107. Lucky Nkwashu Mielani says it's deliberate that triple Ps are not used at local government level because the opportunities for corruption and looting through projects are eliminated. There's no opportunity for cost overruns, and the projects are closely monitored and completed on time and on budget. The model that you're referring to, the build, operate and transfer, which is most commonly used and implemented around the world. It is used also in first world countries. So he agrees there with Mielani. Let's play this WhatsApp voice note.
Morning, Cathy and the listeners. This is Magdalene from Blue. Cathy and the listeners, there will never be a change in the municipalities as long as we are still voting for ANC into power as a sole authority for municipalities. Because whoever comes into a position of mayor, nor city manager, and MMCs, those people are only interested in self-enrichment. Even the comrades who voted them into power or deployed them into power, expect them to do something for them. That is why we're going to experience Gobos deployment. That Gobos deployment itself is dangerous. Magdalene from Bloom, thank you.
All right, thank you for those contributions. And Mielani, again, I want you just to, after you've responded to our listeners, also just touch on this issue of the perception that some of these triple Ps are simply a transfer of eating, for lack of a better phrase, from one group of eaters to another group of eaters that somehow have become a lot more professional, a lot more organized in their eating.
I think it could be a fair perception because the triple Ps are not accessible to the person in the street. As we're talking during the break, is you need significant financial resources. You have to have a proven track record of skills within your organization. You also need to have, the various partnerships that would allow you to be able to leverage some of the skills that you may not perhaps have. So the perception, of course, is that because of the sheer cost and scale of such projects that can be undertaken through Triple Ps, it's not someone who has a grade 1 general building grade, CIDB grading, that could wake up and say, I'm going to be submitting my bid to go and build whatever building. The other aspect is that where Triple Ps perhaps can be seen as a way of, as you put it, whether it's transferring the eating or whichever way you'd like to put it, or transferring opportunities or closing in opportunities for that matter, it is when Triple Ps are being used to deliver offices for government. Our view is that, that is not the design of what a Triple P should be used for, because just to design to deliver a head office for government does not make the difference in the public, if I may put it in that way. But if it's to deliver a service of health, of a road, of a stadium, public transport, and all of those amenities that would touch people and have an impact, then you'd be utilizing those opportunities correctly. How Triple Ps should be opened up, we say there's design. So it means that there is a team of people that must be working on the designs and whatever the case may be. That would allow, whether it's engineers, from across, the walks of life in South Africa, whether it's international, partnering with local engineers, medium size, small size, and so on. That can open up an opportunity for that. The next, aspect is where you are doing the building. The building allows, for many different, people from different, gradings and different, persuasions to be able to form part of that particular consortium that would have been concluded. The financing can be exclusively the domain of the banks or the big, asset managers and so on and so forth. But be that as it may, you want horses for courses. So you want to get the best person who has the capability to undertake that. The operations is something that can also be opened up for various, facilities management companies, whether they are startups, whether they are new, and there are many facets that can be managed within that particular project. So I'm just showing the fact that, and then the maintenance aspects. You can also allow your micro or your small enterprises to form part of the teams that can maintain the air conditioning, the windows, the doors, the this, and so on. So really, I think, it should be seen as a way of packaging opportunities where multiple people and companies and organizations and institutions can together participate. So, for instance, if government is able to put up 30 of these different partners that they can work with, it means each one of those partners should be able to tick a box on inclusion of women, inclusion of disabilities, inclusion of youth, inclusion and micro businesses, rural businesses, and so on. So it can be such a criteria that upfront we can then be able to assess that consortium number one is a great partner because it ticks the boxes in terms of involvement of all of the vulnerable groups, of all the smaller businesses, and so on. So then it makes it, fair for everyone. Then the issue becomes, how do you then bring in finance and expertise into that particular group and get it, running? So the perceptions notwithstanding, but the opportunities that can be packaged through a Triple P can also be enormous and can open up areas that would otherwise be locked for even smaller players.
Okay, so that's just then one perspective in terms of how we can help solve some of the problems at local government. It's 11 o'clock, time for your latest news update.
Cathy, and with the top stories, the Sawa Kodanza funeral service to get underway shortly, and Naledi Pandor threatens to sue Malema. Very good morning to you. The funeral service of a former cabinet minister, Pravin Gordhan, is expected to get underway shortly at the Albert Luthuli Convention Centre in Durban. President Cyril Ramaphosa will deliver the eulogy at the Special Official Funeral Category 2. Godan died in Joburg last week at the age of 75 after a battle with cancer. He'll be cremated later today. Meanwhile, ANC NEC member and former Health Minister Dr. Zweli Mkhize says the party has lost one of its strongest activists.
We have lost one of our, very strongest activists, a man who believed in non-racialism, a man who believed in democracy, fought for it, worked for it, and served our people to the end. And he will always be remembered for his hard work, a very, strong, principled approach to issues.
This is how some of Godan's fellow activists from the 80s remember him.
One thing that sticks out in my mind is that Comrade PG was an activist. Despite his role in government, whether it be as commissioner or as a minister, he's always remained an activist.
And his loss is a loss for us all. He's leaving, a giant has actually fallen. He's leaving South Africa at a time when we need people of his caliber.
He never wavered. He was always that person who was honest. That's my feeling throughout when I had known him. Very honest in everything he dealt with, even with family.
Former International Relations Minister Naledi Pandor has threatened to take legal action against EFF leader Julius Malema if he does not publicly apologize for the comments he made about her. Malema said in an interview with our news desk on Tuesday that some ANC leaders, including Pandor, benefited from the now-defunct VBS Mutual Bank. According to Malema, Pandor got a bond from the bank, but Pandor has dismissed the allegations as unfounded.
I did not receive any bond from VBS. I'm just horrified that out of the blue, Mr. Malema chooses to make such a dishonest allegation about me. And I'm really wondering what is going on. I look forward to his apology, and obviously I'm seeking advice on this matter.
Economists expect a series of interest rates cuts from the Reserve Bank starting from today. They expect the bank to cut rates by a minimum of 25 basis points. Rates remain at their highest level in 15 years, with the repo rate currently at 8.25% and the prime lending rate at 11.75%. This week's Stats SA data showed that the consumer price inflation fell further from 4.6% in July to 4.4% in August. Investec chief economist Annabel Bishop says this puts the index below the bank's 4.5% midpoint target, creating room for the bank to loosen its monetary policy in a low-growth environment.
We're expecting a 25 basis point easing. That's a 0.25% drop. And of course, that will happen at the September MPC meeting. We do not believe this will be the only cut. We think South Africa is now entering an interest rate cutting cycle that will certainly stretch over the course of next year and into 2026.
And the U.S. brand Tupperware has filed for bankruptcy as it struggles to survive in the face of sliding sales. The food storage container firm says it'll ask for the court's permission to start a sale of the business. It says it aims to continue operating. The 78-year-old firm has become so synonymous with food storage that many people use its name when referring to any plastic container. Despite attempts to freshen up its products in recent years and reposition itself to a younger audience, Tupperware has failed to stand out from its competitors. Recapping the top story at 11 o'clock, the funeral service of former Cabinet Minister Pravin Gordhan is expected to get underway shortly at the Albert Luthuli International Convention Centre in Durban. For SAFM News, Kemudupi Makhalemeli.
SAFM 104 to 107 nationwide.
This September, S3 brings you thought-provoking nature dockies that will change the way in which you view the world. Temperature Rising tells the story of three activists as they grapple with what thinking globally and acting locally means as they fight the barriers to climate action. Airs Sunday the 8th of September. Channel your inner activist with our selection of premium dockies Sundays at 5 p.m. only on S3. Open up.
Grass will suffer when Golden Lions collide with Natal Sharks. They both target the gold medal. Gauteng tackles KZN. This is the Currie Cup final. Catch the incredible battle of Mzansi's great rugby teams, Golden Lions versus Natal Sharks. The Saturday 21 September at 3:30 p.m. live on SABC2. Also available on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Proudly brought to you by SABC Sport. For the love of the game.
Hi, I'm Khomotso KG Mweketi, and I believe in music's ability to connect, to heal, to remind, and to bring joy. And each week on my Saturday and Sunday show Seasons right here on SAFM, I endeavor to do just that. So join the movement of Seasons every Saturday and Sunday, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. It's addictive. You might invite a friend. Seasons, only on SAFM 104 to 107 nationwide with me, KG Mweketi.
This Heritage Month, SAFM invites you to celebrate the rich tapestry of our nation's diverse cultures. From the vibrant beats of our traditional music to the flavors of our unique cuisines, every culture tells a story of strength, unity, and identity. We honor the heroes and heroines who laid down their lives for our freedom, reminding us that our shared heritage is what makes us strong. Together as one, we celebrate who we are because our culture is our identity. This Heritage Month, let's celebrate every culture, every story, and every voice.
Every person, no matter who you are, what music you're inclined to listen to, and what you do with your weekends. You need a weekend playlist. It's that musical mix of music that accompanies the lazy weekends, whether catching up with friends and family or just taking some time to reflect. Tune in to The Soundtrack of Your Life with me, Ernest Pillay, Saturdays and Sundays, 1 to 4 on SAFM.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
You know, Cathy, I don't understand, man. You know, I was speaking to William here, man, Eastern Cape, East London. Cathy, why can't the state build capacity to build this thing? This thing of consultancy, Cathy, is chowing the state money, man. No, man, no.
Hi, Cathy. I want to remain anonymous. We are actually in that space of triple Ps. And the general triple Ps that you would find, just as a typical example, is if Party A wanted to build an industrial complex, but the bulk infrastructure to connect the industrial complex with the public road means that a service road must be built there. So you then go into partnership to assist government with their responsibility, but also that you not be out of pocket to build something that is not necessarily going to be cost effective unto you. The problem though, there's very little framework within government that exists for triple Ps, with the exception of certain projects that are of national key interests. Hence service delivery is moving so slow. Thanks.
Hello, Cathy. Here in Northwest, East West, because we are ruled by ANC. ANC, I want to tell you the truth, it will take us nowhere. Just go to the website of the government of Northwest and their departments, you'll see you can't even get their email address. Their website are just a mess. I don't know who designed them for them, who designed those for them, but it is a mess. And they don't even respond if you try and find someone who has their emails and you write to them. They won't say they'll help you or they won't help you. They just leave you like that way. They don't respond to emails. The ANC government, that was Cathy.
Good morning. I was Cathy. Good morning, SAFM listeners. I was Cathy. Those who lived in the 80s and the colleagues of Mr. Pravin Gordhan, they will remember him the way he was. And obviously, us who lived now in the 80s and recently until Mr. Pravin Gordhan passed on, we will still remember him the way he was, the way the state entities collapsed under his watch, the way he nearly sold SAA in a very cheap amount. So I think we mustn't deny people the way they are going to remember him. So anyway, may his soul rest in peace. We will remember him the way the SAE entities fall under his watch.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
All right, you're listening to The Talking Point. Yeah, absolutely. And of course, you are more than welcome to remember him in the way that you wish to, especially as per that WhatsApp voice note we received. So just the latest then on that funeral service taking place for Pravin Gordhan. It is only now, I think, officially starting to get underway. We're seeing visuals on SABC TV 404 of a police guard of honor that is making its way into the Durban ICC, accompanying his casket. And we're also seeing President Cyril Ramaphosa as part of that guard of honor. So that program then only really beginning now in earnest. I think it could still be a couple of more minutes before it officially begins, in as far as the programming opening up and you start to hear speakers. We were, of course, standing by to bring you part of those live proceedings, but it does seem that the timing of it may not necessarily fall into our time slot. It could well fall within the shows that are coming up after us. But all that to say that the cortege has arrived at the Durban ICC, and that program will be beginning sometime within the hour. Our final conversation then for today is looking at National Wills Week. This week is National Wills Week, and there is a drive, of course, to get South Africans to have their affairs in order. And the Department of Justice is also one of those that is encouraging us to be mindful of the importance of wills. Euphemia Daniels is the Acting Chief Director, Operations at the Master's Office in the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development. Euphemia, good morning to you. Thank you for your time this morning.
Good morning, Cathy, and good morning to the listeners.
Thank you for your time. So let's perhaps begin with just some of the critical issues that you wanted to raise with our listeners when it comes to wills, particularly when it is governed by customary regimes, whether in the context of customary marriages too.
So in South African law, we've got what we call freedom of testation, which means a testator who's a male or testatrix who's a female can then draw up a will. In terms of that will, they can nominate whoever is supposed to inherit from their estate, or alternatively, who should be the executor who's going to administer the estate on their behalf. The importance of a will is, if you do not have a will, we have something called the Interstate Succession Act. And that act will then determine on your behalf who will inherit from your estate. So when you are testator, and in terms of customary unions, you can then choose either that either one of your spouse or spouses inherits. But if you do not have a will, the Interstate Succession Act will come into play, and it will then look at whether or not you were married. And if you were married, then your spouses will inherit from your estate. So it's advisable that you consider your family dynamics in drawing up a will for yourself.
What have you seen as some of the challenges that often arise that you have to deal with at the Master's Office that has also made this conversation and this awareness important?
Unfortunately, we deal at the Master's Offices with a lot of family feuds, wherein you will have either spouses or children coming to the office, and since there is no will, there is fighting with regards to what should happen with the assets, who should inherit, and for us to be able then to determine, we will look at the Interstate Succession Act. But similarly so, people will come to the office saying that either my father or my spouse said the following must happen, but unfortunately, in South African context, your will must be written out, typed out, but it must be in writing. So if you do not have anything on paper, the master cannot entertain that. We will then have to consult the Interstate Succession Act to see, in terms of the law, who will inherit. So basically, if you have not drawn up a will, whoever you might want to inherit from your estate will obviously not inherit, because why the law stipulates that you look at whether the person was married, if there is a spouse or spouses in terms of customary union, and then secondly, whether or not there is children involved. Depending on the value of the estate, it will also depend who will inherit out of the estate as well.
How are these issues often resolved? So if it's a customary regime, there is no written will. There are conflicting messages from different parts of the family about what the deceased would have wanted to have happen with their estates. So is there a particular criteria that you then look at to resolve these issues?
So firstly, for us, the customary union must obviously be registered with Home Affairs. I know there was a due date until the end of June, but I'm not sure if that due date has been extended. Because if there is no proof of customary union, we normally have a meeting and we require family members to either bring in family members from both sides, a lobola letter and so forth, but also they would have to then also approach the court in order to confirm that there was indeed a marriage. But the quickest way would be to go to Home Affairs, ascertain what the requirements is in order to have that customary marriage registered. Then, if there is a customary marriage involved, and depending on the number of spouses, what we do is we look at the Interstate Succession Act and see who's got an interest in the matter. So obviously it would be then your spouse that would have an interest in the matter, and that's the person that we will ask to nominate in terms of who they would want to be appointed, or do they want to take the appointment up themselves. And unfortunately, in most instances, there is issues where the children and the remaining spouse do not see eye to eye, and it creates family feuds, wherein that is then escalated to the Master's offices. But our mandate, because we are creature of statute, we can only do what the law allows us to do. And for that purpose, if there is no will directing us as to who should inherit, who should be appointed as executor, we will unfortunately have to go back to the Interstate Succession Act, check and see who is the heirs out of the estate, and then consult. If there is obviously no spouse, then the next in line to inherit would be the children of the deceased. and then we will obviously consult them, and they would have to fill in a nomination form in order for us to appoint the person that they have nominated to take up the appointment for the administration of the estate.
Are there, I imagine that there would be examples, but how do you deal with circumstances where people have live-in partners and you find that these individuals have been partners for many, many years, have been in sometimes even decades, have children together, have raised children together. There is no customary marriage that has taken place, but there is no will that has taken place, or that has been drafted rather.
So there has been what we call the Banjua case, where it was indicated that partners living together that can indicate that they had a reciprocal duty of support towards each other, that person would indeed then be considered as a spouse. But however, because we have our own set of requirements, there are certain forms that will then have to be completed at the Master's office. They would have to be proof. There would also have to be confirmations from other parties indicating that indeed that was the situation that took place. And then secondly, there was a reciprocal duty of support wherein households were run, because the parties didn't get married, so therefore the consequences of a marriage, it would not be applicable. But you do look at the reciprocal duty of support. You can also, there's other issues involved as well. So the law is evolving in terms of that. So there are requirements that would have to be complied with before the Master would then be able to look at the matter and documents that would have to be submitted.
So are you saying that live-in partners of different individuals, should their partners then pass away, they have some right that they can claim over the estate of the deceased, even if they have not been customarily married?
Yes, that is correct. But as I stated before, there are certain proof that would have to be submitted to the Master's office at the end of the day. But the best way to circumvent all these issues at the end of the day is to ensure that you draft a will, that your will is compliant with the formalities of the Wills Act, so that you are able to then not leave any doubt as to what was your intention or what should have happened with your estate when you are no longer there. That is why we have embarked on the campaign of National Wills Week, so that people can become aware of it. It's not a difficult thing to draft a will, and all it has to do, it has to comply with the formalities of the will. When it must be in writing, you have to sign each page if your will consists of more than one page. And at the end there of the very last page should then be signed by yourself in front of two competent witnesses, and two competent witnesses should be signing in front of you.
Euphemia, what do you find often contributes to people not drafting wills?
There's a whole host of reasons. Look, it's a very difficult subject to discuss within a family death, because it's not something that people really want to talk about. But some people might think that there might be a fear that people would know, oh, you're inheriting from my estate, so therefore something might happen to me. There's a whole host of things that contribute to people not wanting to. And I think most of all is the fact that people are uncomfortable with the subject. But it's better then to prepare your family, because sometimes when families come to the Master's office, they don't even know where the deceased had a banking account, or where he had insurance policies, or she had insurance policies. And now it creates a problem, because they need to disclose to us, but they don't have the information at the end of the day. So my suggestion would be to have a sit-down, frank discussion with your family or with whoever you trust, and then indicate to them that make a list of all of the policies in your banking accounts, and if you have investments or fixed properties registered in your name, so that your family is aware that in case something happens to you, as well as this is my will and I have left it with so-and-so for safeguarding. So if something happens to me, then you are able to go to that person and obtain the will and take it in from there.
All right, let me go to Lady Smith, Siviwe. You've got a question for Euphemia. Good morning.
Good morning, Cathy. Good morning to your guest. My question is just one and simple. If someone can take a piece of paper at home, a decent piece of paper, write what their wishes are for their will, sign it at the bottom, is that enough? Or do you have to go to a lawyer and get a prescribed form? Now, if you didn't go, maybe you are critical and something happens, you just wrote it for yourself. Or even myself now, write it on a piece of paper and sign it and everything. Will that be considered by the master or something like that? Thanks very much.
Thank you, Siviwe. Euphemia?
Okay, so he's got half of it right. So the first part is whoever inherits or is an executor cannot write out the will. So if he writes out his own will, that is fine. He can do it on a piece of paper in his own handwriting, and then he needs to sign at the bottom thereof. But before he signs, he must sign in front of two competent witnesses. So anybody over the age of 40 who is mentally capable and can give evidence in a court of law can then sign the will. So he needs to have two witnesses signing, and he signs in front of them. And they must please make sure that they are either not inheriting from the estate or that they are nominated as an executor. Also, another thing, your witnesses do not need to know what is written in your will. It's your will. So you can just ask them basically to sign in front of you, and you sign in front of them, and there's your will. So you do not need to go to an attorney or a trust company per se. You can do it yourself. You can use your laptop, type out your will, print it out, and have it signed accordingly.
All right, Euphemia Daniels, let me thank you so much for coming onto the show and for sharing that critical information with us. Anything briefly you want to add before I let you go?
Yeah, I just would want to implore people to please draw up wills. We have couples that do not get divorced at the end of the day, and then there's a bereavement of one of the spouses, and the idea is that that person will not inherit from that estate. But unfortunately, in terms of law, if you are not divorced, that person is still entitled to inherit, especially if you have not drawn up a will indicating that your portion of your estate should not be going to that particular person. So it is very critical, and I just want to ask your listeners to please look at it and if they can, draw up a will for their estates.
All right, Euphemia Daniels, Acting Chief Director, Operations at the Master's Office in the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development. All right, it leads us to the 11:30 news headlines after this break.
The cost of living crisis is real. Here's what one Outsurance client did about it.
I'm Amy. I'm 26 from Kenilworth. When I got my 2022 Ford EcoSport, the immediate thought was to buy an Outsurance, and I pay only 819 Rand per month. No insurers were able to beat or match the premium that I'm currently paying.
Want a car insurance premium that will blow your mind? SMS out to 30754 now. That's out to 30754. Outsurance is a licensed insurer and FSP. T's and C's online.
The Battle of Students will produce real drama, passion, and emotions in the Varsity Derby. UJ have a big assignment to emphasize why they deserve maximum points. But Ama Tugs are growing in confidence that victory can add a good boost to climb higher. This is the Hollywood Bet Super League. Catch Mzansi Queens of the beautiful game. UJ Ladies FC versus University of Pretoria Ladies FC on Saturday 21 September at 2:30 p.m. Live on SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4 and SABC radio stations. Also available at your fingertips on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Brought to you by SABC Sport. For the love of the game.
Good morning, I am Utsile Saku with your news headlines at 11:30. President Cyril Ramaphosa has arrived at the Inkosi Albert Luthuli International Convention Centre in Durban to attend the funeral service of former Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan. Ramaphosa will deliver the eulogy at the Special Official Funeral Category 2. The enormous 10 billion rand debt that five Free State municipalities owe the bulk water supplier Vaal Central Water is threatening water security in the province. The water utility recently reported its mounting debt to the Free State Legislature's Portfolio Committee on Cooperative Governance, saying it would cause cash flow problems. And the Japanese communications company ICOM says the handheld radio model that exploded in Lebanon was discontinued 10 years ago. 32 people were killed when pages that members of the armed group Hezbollah use exploded on Tuesday and yesterday. Details at 12 o'clock.
Team Atlanta ladies are focused on full points as they chase a suitable position in the top half. But UWC want to triumph and pressurize log leaders. This is the Hollywood Bet Super League. Catching Zante Queens of the beautiful game. Team Atlanta Ladies FC versus UWC Ladies FC on Saturday 21 September at 8:30 a.m. Live on SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4. Also available at your fingertips on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Brought to you by SABC Sport. For the love of the game.
The world's best football league makes its return to S3. Will Arsenal finally win their first title since 2004? Or will Man City continue their dominance of the league and win their 7th title under Pep Guardiola? Will the Dutchman in Erik ten Hag and Arne Slot have something to say as Man United and Liverpool step in to contest for the title? But it's not only about winning the title. For some of the 20 teams, it's a chance to improve on their performances from last season. While for others, it's the battle to avoid relegation and stay in the top flight. Every team has a point to prove. This is not just football. This is a masterpiece being played out every weekend. Channel your best sport with the English Premier League. Saturdays at 3 p.m. on S3. Open up.
S3. Cathy Mohlahlana on SAFM.
All right, we continue the conversation on the talking point. Our final conversation today is going to focus on the U.S. elections as we continue to track on what is really going to be one of the biggest elections to be held this year in the U.S. Of course, there has been some changes in the presidential nomination, and you've had 2 assassination attempts on at least one presidential nomination or one presidential candidate, who is Donald Trump. He's, of course, facing Kamala Harris, and they'll be fighting it off for 50 states to win the Electoral College votes. Some of the key states that may swing this election include Wisconsin, Georgia, Arizona, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Nevada, and Michigan. So we've seen the 2 candidates face off during a presidential election, but that's from us watching from the outside looking in. So we decided to get those that understand the American election system a lot better than perhaps we do. Rodney Davis is a former member of the U.S. Congress from Illinois. He's also managing director at Cozen O'Connor Public Strategies. Jason Altmaier is a former member of the House of Representatives from Pennsylvania. And is also the author of the critically acclaimed book, Dead Center: How Political Polarization Divided America and What We Can Do About It. So one Republican, one Democrat, both of them reflecting then on what they believe will be the key themes of this election. I started off with asking them, of course, about the presidential debate and who they thought won the day.
Well, clearly, if it was going by the debate rules that I've been taught, Vice President Harris won. She was able to really explain to the American people why she wanted to be president, although a little short on details when it comes to plans, a little short on responsibility, of course, as being vice president to the sitting president. But she did do well in baiting former President Trump into responding to her. He was on defense and he was voluntarily giving up his ability to move on to new questions by continuing to go back to the moderators and respond to Vice President Harris. And in all of the debate training that I've been in, if you're responding to your opponent, you're losing the debate itself. Now, I don't know how many Americans watched that debate in its entirety for over 90 minutes. So the polling that's going to be coming out in the next few days is going to be the telltale sign as to whether or not this debate made a difference. Could it be a difference maker like the last debate was, to allow Democrats to push Joe Biden out of his candidacy? I don't know. Time will tell.
Jason?
I agree with everything that Rodney just said, and I would add that context is important here, because Vice President Harris, it might sound unusual to an audience from South Africa, but Vice President Harris is relatively unknown to the American people as vice president. She's obviously, President Biden remains president of the United States. He has been the public face of this administration. He has been in public office for more than 50 years. And as Rodney said, until fairly recently, the summer, he was the candidate for re-election, and he would have been the candidate in that debate last night. But because of his performance in the first debate, he was cast aside, and now Vice President Harris is the nominee. So the context of her having this opportunity before an extraordinarily large television audience across multiple networks where it was simulcast, to define herself, to show the American people the version of her that she would like them to see, and for President Trump, as Rodney said, to miss the opportunity to define her, to bring up questions that are legitimate questions on her policies, on her changing positions, on her record, past and present. Very little of that came up because President Trump, instead of doing that, took the opportunity to revisit old grievances, to respond to issues that the vice president purposely brought up to get under his skin. And in answer to the question of who won, I would say more than anything, former President Trump lost. He lost the debate for himself. He performed very poorly. And by doing so, he allowed Vice President Harris to leave the debate looking much better. She controlled the tone of the debate and forced him to perform very poorly. So she did very well. President Trump did very poorly. And I do think this is going to have an impact on the race moving forward.
I want to touch on a point that both of you have made, which is really that on the substantive issues, at least that have been identified as the key issues around election, whether we're talking foreign policy, the economy, migration, and crime, that much of that didn't really come out in terms of the plans on how to deal with those issues. Rodney, when you think about the ordinary American and looking at the debate, do you think that's going to be a problem for them? Do you think they're sitting there thinking, well, I don't think we got a clear enough answer on this issue, or is it just the spectacle of it all that they're likely to just be swayed by?
Well, here in America, there aren't too many undecided voters right now. So most people already made up their mind as to who they're going to vote for when it comes to this presidential election. And it's even more limited in the 7 what we call battleground states in the United States. Remember, the United States does not elect our president by popular vote. We elect our president through the Electoral College. And right now, the margin in the Electoral College will be decided by 7 states here in the United States. So that group of undecided voters is even smaller. So really, polling in those battleground states will tell us how much work needs to be done, how much impact this debate might have had. But I don't think either candidate is thinking about the debate right now. They're thinking about, what do I have to do today in those battleground states to convince undecided voters to vote for me? And as we look ahead, we have a very short window of time before Election Day. And as a matter of fact, early voting has already started in some states. So they are going to be out raising money to be able to run their campaign commercials, to be able to try and swing those voters their way in the states that are important to victory.
Jason, it's a tight contest. And if we're to look at it through what Rodney's saying, that there aren't that many undecided voters, coming, of course, into the conventions, the polling was showing that by and large there seemed to be a very tight contest between Donald Trump and Joe Biden at the time. Do you think that this race from a Republican-Democrat lens is still that tight? And what does it mean for somebody like Kamala Harris, who still has to largely introduce herself to an American electorate?
I do think it is still a very close race. As Rodney pointed out, in our system of presidential elections, it's not about the nationwide vote. And there are still at least 7 states where it is uncertain which candidate will prevail. I think you have to look at, why are they undecided? It's pretty clear President Trump has been on the scene internationally, certainly also, but nationally, very well known in America for 40 plus years. He has a temperament that is unusual in politics, whether you like it or not. And it would be hard to believe there are people out there that are undecided on President Trump. There are certainly people who are undecided on Vice President Harris. As I said earlier, she is still building an identity and has the opportunity to be defined, whether she defines herself or the opposition defines her. And I think that's where the undecided vote will come. You listed off accurately many of the issues that are being debated and that are important to the American people: crime, immigration, the economy. I would add climate change and abortion as issues that are very important to Democrats. But at the presidential level, it's going to be more about personality. But if you're still undecided, it's not about issues. It's about the candidates. It's about a level of discomfort, probably, with both candidates, and you're going to be forced to choose one of those two. And I think Vice President Harris is in the more advantageous position of being able to shape perceptions, whereas Vice President Trump, everything that can be known about him is already known, and those perceptions are already made.
If we're going to look at then this election and what you believe this election is going to represent for the American people, what it's going to represent for the world. Of course, it's significant if we look at the obvious, Rodney. We have a female candidate yet again who could potentially be the first female president of the United States. What else makes this election significant for you?
I like the fact that you're asking my opinion all the time, so I don't have to worry about getting fact-checked by Jason over there. But what really is interesting to me is that we are just at a time in our nation's history where we are very polarized, but we are at a time in our nation's history where I believe we don't have as many swing voters that will go from Republican to Democrat. People have really picked their political jerseys. They've picked their political teams, and the number of individuals in the battleground states or the electoral college victory that our presidential candidates need is so small. That's the biggest surprise for me, because Americans are seemingly giving themselves less of an opportunity to choose the closer we get to Election Day, not just for president, but this runs up and down the board for every elected office here in the United States.
For 18 years, Kumbulekhaya has been fostering healing through forgiveness and reconciliation.
Are you asking me that? Yes. I grew up without a mom.
So what happened to your family?
What family? You are my family. What happened to you?
Witness as families forgive one another and reunite after a long time. Catch the new season of Kumbulekaya on SABC1 every Wednesday at 9 p.m.
Banyana Ba Style believe the only way to maintain their lifestyle in the summit is to grab an important win. However, JBW ladies have calculated the power of 3 vital points and refuse to settle for less. This is the Hollywood Men's Super League. Catch Mzansi Queens of the beautiful game. Mamelodi Sundowns Ladies FC versus JBW Ladies FC on Saturday 21 September at 11 a.m. Live on SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4. Also available at your fingertips on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Brought to you by SABC Sport. For the love of the game.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
The book reading. Please note that the views expressed in this book are not that of the station. Listeners' discretion is advised. SAFM presents another episode of A Life of Purpose, written by Luvuyo Wochela and Lumkile Wiseman Kuhlu. The reader is Lerato Mvelase.
Thus, the opportunity to study at UCT could not have come at a better time, and he felt it was an intervention from God. In those days, the accounting profession did not have a relationship with the black universities. The profession only took interest in the training of blacks after the formation of the Association for the Advancement of Black Accountants, ABASA, ABASA, in 1985, and the firms were not recruiting at black university campuses. The visit of Professor Kritzinger to Forte was extraordinary. In fact, at the time, the emphasis was on Afrikaner empowerment. Afrikaners were taking over the economy and key social institutions by entrenching themselves in universities, core professions, and major sectors of the economy, banking, insurance, and mining in particular. In that rising Afrikaner hegemony, the accounting profession was also not spared. Afrikaners were increasingly entering the profession, and the number of their accounting and auditing firms burgeoned. Wiseman was aware of these dynamics, and thus he was determined to make his mark. Cape Town, 1975 to 1976. Wiseman and Theo Jordan left for Cape Town at the start of 1975 to register for the CTA course. It was customary at the time for CTA classes to start before other university activities. In many ways, this benefited Wiseman and Theo, who wanted to register, settle in, and be ready to embark on their program. While their admissions were being processed, both had arranged to stay temporarily at the home of Njongonkulu Ndungane, with whom Wiseman had stayed in contact since their release from the Victor Vesta prison. But Njongonkulu had just gotten married in the Eastern Cape and had arranged to spend December of 1974 and much of January of the following year in that part of the Cape. Thus, he missed the arrival of Wiseman and Theo in Cape Town. This did not matter at first, because Kritzinger had made prior arrangements for Wiseman's and Theo's registration and tuition fees to be processed. Both had received letters from the Office of the Minister of Bantu Administration, granting them special permission to register and study at a white South African university. Notwithstanding these arrangements, they soon encountered an unforeseen challenge since neither had a residential permit for Cape Town. Having been hosted by the Ndungane household for weeks, they had decided they needed to seek their own accommodation by the time their formal classes started. Wiseman and Theo had, on their arrival, inquired from the UCT authorities about their residential arrangements, but were informed that the university didn't offer hostel accommodation beyond undergraduate level. They could also not reside within what was proclaimed white Cape Town. We were told at UCT that we must find our own accommodation, and then we went to these officers in charge of townships in Langa. There, we were told no. There was no way we could be given permits to be in Cape Town area unless we had a family that was prepared to accept us in one of the townships, Guguletu, nyanga or langa. We were then instructed to find such a family, but we said we would make no such arrangements. We had not come there to live with family. We came because we were admitted at UCT and were expecting to rent a place. That was a great handicap, and the university could not help on this issue. In an ensuing frantic search, they found accommodation in a Christian Youth Movement Center in the District 6 area of Cape Town. At this time, District 6, initially a barely planned settlement of free slaves in the earlier inner-city Cape Town residential area, had undergone the brunt of the apartheid resettlement policy of 1966, the Group Area Act. More than 50,000 of its residents were uprooted and the majority were dumped in the newly constructed Cape Flats further away. Yet a few households remained within the original District 6 zone in 1975, and some of the original churches, social centers, and mosques in that historical settlement were intact. The Christian Youth Movement Center, which offered accommodation to Wiseman and Theo, was one of those standing edifices. They soon found out that their accommodation was meant for laborers from the countryside or the small towns of the Western Cape, but they decided to stay on because they felt they would be close enough to the UCT campus, especially the Harding Hall, where they attended their lectures. Wiseman and Theo had begun to acquaint themselves with that part of Cape Town by the time Njongunkulu Ndungane returned. On arrival, he was of course keen to know where they were living and was stunned to learn they were in District 6. His perception of District 6, and particularly the characters he knew in the area where the Christian Youth Movement Center was located, made him uncomfortable, so he decided that Wiseman and Theo should live with him and his wife, Nosipho, at the Anglican Mission House of Athlone, where his parish was located. Ironically, the Group Areas Act had designed Athlone a colored area, and even though Ndungane was in charge of his parish, he didn't have special permission to reside in the area. Taking in Wiseman and Theo, who also didn't have residential permits, potentially compounded the problem. But Ndungane was adamant that they could all risk that illegal residency, which they did for the rest of 1975. There was one testing moment when Theo's car was broken into. Everyone was apprehensive about reporting it to the police for fear of exposing their unauthorized residence in Athlone. However, when the police eventually came, following Ndungane's request, they focused exclusively on investigating the break-in and not the unauthorized residency. Apart from that, Wiseman and Theo had a pleasant time in Athlone. We lived the whole year with Njongo and his wife Nosipho. It was a wonderful familiar relationship. They looked after us very well. They were just family, really, in every respect. And likewise, we felt like we were part of Njongo's family and his wife. We are forever grateful to them for that. For Wiseman's budding family, 1975 was a special year with the arrival of their first child, a son, Aqalisile, aptly meaning they have begun. After Wiseman's departure for Cape Town, Hazel moved from Umtata to live with Wiseman's uncle, Zamoxolo in Zwelitsha, King Williamstown. This arrangement strengthened Wiseman's close relationship with his uncle Zamoxolo, whom he regularly visited even after completing his studies and returning from UCT. The move meant that Hazel was closer to her mother in the King Williamstown village of Gamniba. Meanwhile, the challenge for Wiseman to conquer the CTA program continued. There were still outstanding courses to be completed with UNISA before the final CTA year. One of these was the daunting Introduction to Data Processing, and there were also other courses in cost and management accounting. He had notified Kridzinga about his challenges at the beginning of the academic year, but the professor felt that Wiseman could overcome these by attending additional classes and also working harder. consistently encouraged by his wife Hazel, by his lecturers, his classmate Theo, and his friends and host Njongunkulu and Nosipho Ndungane. Wiseman pushed hard. Besides being motivated by the birth of his first son, he had kept abreast of developments elsewhere on the continent. He was thrilled by the imminent independence of Mozambique and keenly updated himself about other liberation movements driven by his aspiration and dreams to contribute to a post-colonial Africa. The hard work paid off at the end of the 1975 academic year. He passed all his courses except cost accounting, which he had to rewrite through a supplementary examination in January 1976. He grabbed that opportunity with both hands and attained the course when he finally sat for the supplementary examinations. More importantly, Wiseman had, by the beginning of 1976, achieved his CTA with the University of Cape Town. Starting on that bright note, 1976 loomed as another challenging but thrilling year. After arranging for his CTA program at UCT, the Forte Accounting Department had procured him to teach its undergraduate students, and he worked side by side with his former lecturer, Mr. van Eerden. His return from Cape Town also meant he was nearer to Hazel, who at the time continued to work in King Williamstown. Soon, another living and communicating schedule began. Hazel recalls, "Come Fridays, he would drive from Forte and come to pick me up from work. We would then go home where we would pick up our child and say our goodbyes to my mother, uncles, and my younger brother, and go to Alice for the weekend and return again on Sundays." Wiseman had to prepare for his biggest test yet. He now qualified to sit for the PAAB examination. After passing that, he would have met all the requirements to register as a chartered accountant. At the time, the PAAB examinations took place in May each year, which effectively meant that Wiseman had to concurrently teach accounting while also preparing for an examination. Fortunately for him, Van Eerden was compassionate, and he gave Wiseman a manageable teaching load and offered him whatever support he needed.
That was another episode of A Life of Purpose, second edition, written by Luvuyo Wochela and Lumkile Wiseman Kuhlu. The book is available online on www.kmmr.co.za, KMMR Publishers, and in all leading bookstores countrywide. It is broadcast on SAFM at 11:45 Monday to Thursday on The Talking Point. It is produced for the station by Vovi Patala, read by Lerato Mvelase, technical production Wiseman Manqele and Nanda Khoza.
This Heritage Month, SAFM invites you to celebrate the rich tapestry of our nation's diverse cultures. From the vibrant beats of our traditional music to the flavors of our unique cuisines, every culture tells a story of strength, unity, and identity. We honor the heroes and heroines who laid down their lives for our freedom, reminding us that our shared heritage is what makes us strong. Together as one, we celebrate who we are because our culture is our identity. This Heritage Month, let's celebrate every culture, every story, and every voice.
SAFM 104 to 107 nationwide.
It is exactly 12 o'clock Thursday, the 19th of September 2024. A very warm welcome to Update at Noon here on SAFM, leading the conversation. I'm Udo Carlse, standing in for Sakina Kamwendo. Coming up this hour.
I, Praveen Jamnadas Gordon, solemnly affirm that I will be faithful to the Republic of South Africa and will obey, respect, and uphold the Constitution.
The funeral service of former Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan is underway at the Albert Luthuli International Convention Centre in Durban. In other news,
and we saw the core CPI inflation rate, which excludes volatile food and energy prices, declining as well. Now, the SARB is expected to cut interest rates this week by 25 basis points.
all eyes on the Reserve Bank's Monetary Policy Committee announcement this afternoon. Will we see a cut in the prime lending rate? And of course, John Gericke with the latest sport headlines.
More rugby coming up at the Cape Town Stadium this afternoon, and plenty Champions League matches to tell you about.
Share your views with us on 41391. Those SMSs charged at R1.50. You can give us a call directly on 086 0002032. Your WhatsApp voice notes on 0826923909. And you can also reach out to us on Twitter and Facebook at SABC News_radio is the show's handle. Mine, very simply, at Udo Karelse SA. And use the hashtag #UpdateAtNoon. These and plenty more stories coming up on today's edition of the show. First, though, the latest news with Otsile Saku.
Thanks, Udo. Top stories. Pravin Gordhan's funeral underway in Durban and a guide arrested at the Kruger National Park. Good afternoon. The funeral service of former Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan has begun at the Inkosi Albert Luthuli International Convention Centre in Durban. President Cyril Ramaphosa will deliver the eulogy at the special official Category 2 funeral. Gordhan died at Johannesburg Hospital last week at the age of 75 after a battle with cancer. He will be cremated later today. Meanwhile, ANC NEC member and former Health Minister Dr. Zweli Mkhize says the party has lost one of its strongest activists.
We have lost one of our, very strongest activists, a man who believed in non-racialism, a man who believed in democracy, fought for it, worked for it, and served our people to the end. And he will always be remembered for his hard work, a very, strong, principled approach to issues.
This is how some of Gordhan's fellow activists from the 80s remember him.
One thing that sticks out in my mind is that Comrade PG was an activist. Despite his role in government, whether it be as commissioner or as a minister, he's always remained an activist.
And his loss is a loss for us all. He's leaving, a giant has actually fallen. He's leaving South Africa at a time when we need people of his caliber.
He never wavered. He was always that person who was honest. That's my feeling throughout when I had known him. Very honest in everything he dealt with, even with family.
The enormous 10 billion rand debt that 5 Free State municipalities owe the bulk water supplier Vaal Central Water is threatening water security in the province. The water utility recently reported its mounting debt to the Free State Legislature's Portfolio Committee on Cooperative Governance, saying it would cause cash flow problems. Some municipalities have already declared that they are unable to pay their debt. The committee's chairperson, Armand Klute, says this is a classic case of mismanagement.
Look, ultimately it's an interstatal debt crisis we are experiencing in the Free State currently. Why do I say that? Well, the state is owing itself money. A municipality is owing a water board such as Vaal Central money. These are huge amounts, and it affects residents. Residents are buying water or they're paying for water, but when the debt levels are growing and the Vaal Central decides to stop the water, it affects those residents, and that's a problem we have to attend to quite quickly.
A guide has been arrested for allegedly being in possession of an unlicensed hunting rifle inside the Kruger National Park. SANParks spokesperson Ike Patla says the guide was arrested following a tip-off. He has this warning for employees who get involved in crime.
SANParks is on record saying that criminality will not be tolerated among staff. The suspect will be named after appearing in court and will also face internal disciplinary proceedings. Investigations are ongoing.
And finally, further afield, the Japanese communications company ICOM says that the handheld radio model that exploded in Lebanon was discontinued 10 years ago. 32 people were killed when pages that members of the armed group Hezbollah use exploded on Tuesday and yesterday. Hezbollah has blamed Israel for the attack and vowed to retaliate. Israeli officials have not commented on the blast. The BBC's Shaima Khalil has the details.
ICOM said that the model of the radio device reported to have exploded in Lebanon, the ICV-82, was produced and exported by the company, including to the Middle East, from 2004 to October 2014, but was then discontinued. Since then, ICOM said the device has not been shipped by the company. The statement added that production of the batteries needed to operate the main walkie-talkie unit has also been discontinued, and that any products for overseas markets were sold only to the firm's authorized distributors. Earlier, a sales executive at the U.S. subsidiary of ICOM told the Associated Press news agency the radio devices that exploded in Lebanon appear to be a knockoff product, adding that it was easy to find counterfeit versions of the product online.
Recapping the top story, the funeral service of former Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan has begun at the Inkosi Albert Luthuli International Convention Centre in Durban. For SFM News, I'm Utsile Saku. Headlines at 12:30.
Update at noon, midday to 1 p.m.
Good afternoon, and that funeral will be the main thrust of the show across the next hour. Udo Karels in for Sakina Kamwendo. I've been watching the funeral service taking place at the Inkosi Albert Luthuli International Convention Centre in Durban for the last hour or so, and preparations leading up to it. There was a tribute paid to him this morning, the late minister, and delving into his history in fighting abuse of our tender system. How we fought for reform of the retirement system, how we took steps against the secretive nuclear deal, and of course his initial fight with the Guptas in Oak Bay Investments issues with our commercial banks. You'll remember all of that. And perhaps an invite to you to pay tribute in the way that you best see fit, utilizing all the ways to get in touch with us right now, though. Let's chat on the line to our senior politics reporter, Ntebo Mokobo. Ntebo, good morning. Oh, good afternoon, rather.
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to the listeners.
I'm having a look now at the camera focusing on our president, Cyril Ramaphosa. He will be providing his eulogy in a couple of minutes' time. But take us through some of the other faces that are present there today.
Well, you would recall that, the late Pravin Gordhan was one of the really remarkable leaders in the ANC. So there are a number of ANC leaders, for instance, even those that he worked with in the underground structures of the ANC and, of course, in the mass democratic movement. You know that, at some point he worked with the likes of Bheki Cele here in this province of KwaZulu-Natal, the likes of former Chief Justice Raymond Zondo. He's from here in KZN, and those are the people who were at the forefront against the brutal apartheid system government. Apartheid government at the time. And of course, as you correctly pointed out, the president is here to deliver the eulogy. And of course, Meg Maharaj is one of the lifelong friends, someone that he worked with during the days of Operation Vula. So there are indeed a number of people that he worked with. And of course, even those who followed on his footsteps. For instance, you will recall at some point that he was at the Revenue Service, and there are a number of people from the financial sector who are also here to pay their farewell.
All right. Now, it is a special official Category 2 funeral. What does that entail then as the day progresses? Because obviously tributes and eulogies at the funeral today, but what's set to transpire for the rest of the program?
Well, you would call the special official funeral Category 1. It's normally done by the soldiers, the army, where you have the head of the South African National Defence Force working with the president, and of course at some point he would be taking the national flag, giving it to the president, and the president giving it to the family. But this time around it's special official Category 2, where it's run by the police. So instead of the head of the National Defence Force. It would be the head of the South African Police Service in the form of the National Police Commissioner, Fanime Semola. He will be the one who will be taking the flag and giving it to the president. The president will be giving it to the family. And of course, even the platoon that received him here, or those that had the guard of honor, were members of the South African Police Service. So that's the only difference here. It's the official funeral, but the category one it's normally run by the soldiers or by the army, and this one is category 2 is done by the police.
Talk to us about some of the sentiments shared this morning. I sort of, in the introduction, spoke about what he will be remembered for, but his legacy beyond politics. What have people said there at the funeral today?
Well, what mainly came out for now is that he was one gentleman who was incorruptible and someone who was all about taking this country forward and making it a South Africa that is at peace with itself, the continent and the rest of the world. So that is what he stood for. And of course, if you look at some of his track record, especially at the South African Revenue Service, he's one man who put SARS in the map of the world, especially when it comes to its tax collection, especially when it comes to its professionalism. So he's been hailed for that. That is with this person. And again, you will recall, Udo, that at some point he was the Minister of Finance. Remember, it was in 2009 when he was appointed by former President Jacob Zuma to lead the Treasury, the National Treasury. And at the time, it was just few months after the economic, the global economic downturn, where we had the recession. South Africa only experienced a recession for 6 months. And after 6 months, Pravin Gordhan managed to steer the ship in the right direction in terms of putting or having its economic fundamentals, its economic policies and everything, and trying to really cushion it from the impact of the economic downturn or the economic meltdown. He did that marvelously so. But as someone who served in politics, you would have your mishaps here and there. At some point, he was then deployed to Cocta and ultimately was then deployed to the public enterprises. That's the only blight, I would say, in the legacy that some people are pointing to. For instance, as the Minister of the Public Enterprise at some point, the public enterprise or SOEs under this public enterprise department or public enterprise portfolios, we are told around 200 billion was lost to some of these SOEs because they were not really doing what they're supposed to be doing under his leadership. And of course, even the sale of Tagazo, the sale of SAA, some shares to Tagazo, stake to Tagazo at some point, remained a blight on his legacy, where people are talking about 51 rand a share to the shares, and even today they can't even declare how much was made. Even the declaration of the worth of SAA at some point, it was around 1 billion rand, but ultimately again the fire DG said it was 7 billion rand, and indeed it was found out to be 7 billion rand as opposed to the 1 billion rand that they were talking about. So that will remain a blight in it. If you're in politics, you can't be liked by many. There are those who will hail you as a hero and those who will see you as a villain. So that's exactly what is happening. It's a mixed bag of legacy. But what stood out is that he was a man who was incorruptible. He was a beacon of hope in the fight against state capture over the years.
Brilliant overview there of what's transpired, how the former minister has been remembered thus far this morning by our senior politics reporter, Ndebo Mukobo. If I'm looking at the program here, Mac Maharaj, the former cabinet minister, was due to hit the podium about 11:30. He's only been speaking since around about 12:05 this afternoon. But let's go there live now and just hear how he has paid tribute, or is paying tribute, to the late minister.
To cultivate grassroots mobilization with the concept organize, conscientize, mobilize. I recall this concept because we are still grappling with bringing to book those involved in state capture and with the challenge of rooting out corruption in both public and private sectors. In order to succeed in removing this huge obstacle to creating a better life for all, imbued with the spirit that we are one people building one nation, we need, therefore, as Pravin would have it, that the ANC puts its house in order and renders itself fit for purpose. That that state institutions are capacitated, that the media continue to shine their searchlight, and that civil society flourishes and continues to enforce accountability and participatory democracy. So, organize, conscientize, mobilize, make democracy deliver. Hambagasle, Comrade Praveen, Hambagasle, Kawalamak Kawa.
That, of course, was former Cabinet Minister Mac Maharaj. And if I go by the program, what will follow will be a tribute by Ms. Ella Gandhi. We will hear from Kusatu's Singiswa Losi, and then former colleague and friend Mcebisi Jonas, Ibrahim Patel, both ministers in the Cabinet previously. Chief Justice Raymond Zondo is set to hit the stage, and then there will be a tribute by his daughters Anisha Gordhan and Priyesha Gordhan, followed then by the eulogy delivered by President Cyril Ramaphosa. Shall we go back to the live event there? And it should be Ms. Ella Gandhi who's on the stage now, just paying tribute to the late Praveen Gordhan.
Praveen Gordhan, all of them, I won't name them because there are quite a few here. His Excellency the President, all protocols observed. It is indeed a sad day for me to have to bid farewell to a friend, a mentor, and a comrade. Although I am just under 10 years older than him, age is just a number. I valued his advice and guidance from as early as in the 1970s, when soon after my banning orders, in the 80s, when soon after my banning orders were lifted, I was invited to be a guest speaker at a National Women's Day event in 1983. I was so nervous after being silenced for 9.5 years to have to address a meeting. It was Praveen who encouraged me and helped me with my speech. He would not write a speech, I believe, for anyone, nor did he for me, but helped me to develop the ideas and the focus. That was his style of mentorship. Another important aspect of Praveen's life was when, during the struggle days, he was recruiting key activists. I remember a meeting he called up with about 20 of us. I think Vani was present at this meeting as well, and I'm sure that she will recall this meeting where he bluntly asked all of us whether we were prepared to give 100% of our energies to the struggle. Complete dedication is what he sought and what he gave to the struggle. And Vani was one of them that we should also recognize today as we pay tribute to Praveen. This dedication to the struggle meant that whatever field of work one is in, one can transform the workplace towards a progressive stance instead of treating the job just as an opportunity for material gains. I was told by a friend that when he was working at King Edward Hospital, he was among the batch that joined Nihau. He worked later more in the background with social workers, encouraging us to resist being trapped in the conservative stance, helping individuals without locating them in the wider societal context. He emphasized the need for social workers to focus on community issues as well as focusing on individual work. In this spirit, he sent a message to the NIC 130 celebrations on the 9th of September,
just a few weeks ago. Perhaps this was his last message, and he said, and I quote, "Importantly, to highlight the values and spirit that was embedded in the Congress movement and how they should be reinvigorated in the years ahead. This is also an opportunity to reflect on the last 60 to 70 years after the signing of the Dadunguma-Naika Pact. This pact laid the political basis for, firstly, unity in action amongst all oppressed communities, the Defiance Campaign and the Anti-Group Areas Act campaign, and many boycotts. The Congress